In today's episode, I have the pleasure to talk with Andrew Ostler. He is the designer and engineer behind Expert Sleepers, and he had just released 3 analog modules. And if you would ask me 3 months ago, what would Andrew release, I would have never guessed there would be an analog oscillator or a filter or a phaser. Andrew is known for developing very complex and very useful devices you could use in your setup. Interesting fact, and probably relevant here, Andrew actually worked on Maya in the past, so he designed very high performance tools for animators to work with. So when I'm thinking about the disting, it's like a workhorse for anyone who is performing with Eurorack Synth or composing or anything doing with Eurorack Synth. This thing is like a workhorse for anything you want to do. So I can really see the resemblance there, and it's nice to see how from something so complex as this thing, he went into creating analog devices. And these analog devices also have their own twist that makes them novel. It feels like he's working really from a passion of building his own instruments, but also he just really likes a good challenge. And looking into analog stuff, it's not like he didn't build anything with analog electronics before, but building an oscillator or a filter was not really a thing that he played with before working on these modules. So there are a lot of different things we're covering here, and I think that I'm just blurbing for way too long now. Without further ado, I'm Roy, this is the Synth Design Podcast, and this is Andrew Ostler from Expert Sleepers.
The philosophy is that I always make what I personally would find useful to have. So it so happens that a long time ago, what would be personally useful to me was some things to control my very small analog synth setup as it was at the time from a computer. So that turned into Silent Way and then into the ES1 and all those modules. And that's kind of grown from there. But then, you know, what I really wanted when I started making these things was to have what I always wanted from a modular synth, which is to have some pure analog sound. That's why I got into modular. Originally, it just so happened I didn't focus my efforts on that because I guess there was plenty of those kind of things around. Well, I guess so. I mean, we're going back a long time here. So compared to today, there was almost nothing around, right? It was dirt for all analog solutions, but that already felt like enough. So yeah, I mean, yeah, there is the continuance of that company philosophy, but the philosophy is very broad and very specific to my wants and needs. It just seemed like just like getting back to why I thought modular synths specifically were interesting in the first place, which was to have some interesting analog stuff going on. And I guess also having come off the back of the ES9 and then the Disting EX, which are very, very digital products, and really quite complex designs, I really fancied a break from that kind of work, because the other project that I was about to launch into, which I will do eventually, was an even bigger digital project, and it just felt like I would be refreshed by a change, hence the analog stuff. So yeah, I mean, it was a lot of fun. I learnt a lot doing it, actually. Very, very different to doing the digital things.
Yeah. Did you have any experience with analog electronics before?
Well, yeah, I mean, all the ones I'm calling digital, like the interfacing things and the disting, they all have analog bits in them, right? They're all dealing with conversion between the two. So yeah, it wasn't all completely new in that respect, but I'd never built a filter or an oscillator previously. So yeah, that was new. And I didn't kind of just go out and copy a circuit for a VCO. I was trying to come up with something original, or, you know, what's the point if you're just doing something that's already been done? So that was learning as well. Learning about those kind of things, and learning about the properties of components that I never knew they had. Like even something simple like a diode, I spent a week finding just the right diode for one of the modules, because it really did make a difference what diode you use. Whereas previously with like digital stuff, it's either the diode conducts or it doesn't, and that's basically the end of it. So yeah, good fun.
Yeah. So when you're looking at the process of designing an analog module in comparison to a digital one,
yeah,
what's more interesting for you to do at the moment?
As in, what might I do next? I'm in kind of a happy place where it could go either way at the moment. I've got more ideas than I could possibly do, analog and digital. So yeah, I'll probably do some. I've got quite a lot of firmware stuff I want to catch up with on the Disting and Disting EX. A lot of interesting ideas there, and I'll probably keep the analog stuff rumbling along. The thing with certainly anything that requires physical prototyping, there's always this kind of dead week or two or more, even if you're like getting a PCB built or something like that. Mm-hmm. So as much as I might like to plow on with an analog design straight away, there's always these dips and gaps. So things tend to get interleaved. But yeah, I think, I don't know, I'd see where it takes me. But yeah, certainly got plenty of things to be trying.
The process, is it a similar process to design something analog or digital?
For me it wasn't, but that's partly because I hadn't really done much analog. It was, for me, starting this analog thing, oddly, it was the first time I'd ever actually bothered to keep like a engineering notebook, just like a book with pencil and paper and actually scribbling things down in it, because there was so much iteration and trying things and trying to remember what I'd already tried and tweaking things. Whereas with the digital stuff, I find it's once you've decided what you want to do and identified the parts that are going to do it for you, it's basically like just plugging it all together and then seeing if it works or not. Whereas with the analog, there was a lot more breadboarding, a lot more switching stuff in and out and fiddling around. So it's actually quite different. I mean, if we're talking about my design process, it has been a completely different process for me doing these analog ones than it ever was before. So whether that will inform how I do other things in the future, I'm not sure. I think the digital stuff I can kind of hold in my head, or put it all in a schematic capture program or something straight away. But the analog was definitely, well, I guess analog design in a way, in that pencil and paper scribbles, trying to remember what I did a month ago and why that capacitor value was wrong, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So the process starts with just a notebook, and then you go into breadboarding. Is there any phase in between that you're creating, maybe some sort of like a development board or anything like that?
No, not for these analog ones. I went straight to, well, scribble it on paper, breadboard it, see what happens. Then after quite a lot of breadboarding, for some of the things where it was really sensitive to component specification or board layout, I made some little kind of like sub PCB assemblies to plug into the breadboard. So there was that kind of stage, and then straight into, well, I guess once the design was kind of locked down on the breadboard, then I did like some proper PCB layout and proper, building a PCB which might actually become the product. So it's like a two-stage thing that way. Like I said, often with the digital things, I've gone basically straight from idea to production prototype in one step, and then maybe iterated. Yeah. But I wasn't able to do that with these ones for sure.
These sub modules you refer to, this is basically like.
Shall I grab one and hold it up to the camera?
Yeah,
Yeah.
please do.
So this is the breadboard for the VCO.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can see that, like, hit, I don't know, is it all going to fall if I tip it? So here, there's like a wee PCB. So that was like taking the transistorized core of the VCO and putting it onto a PCB, because it's very sensitive to stray capacitance. And when you're breadboarding, there's all kinds of horrible capacitance everywhere. It really is an awful way to build electronics. So that was to kind of go see how good it could be with a realistic PCB layout, just for the bit where it was really sensitive. And also try the surface mount versions of the transistors to make sure they were specified similarly to the through hole ones. And there's a couple. There was another one. Yeah, there was a surface mount version of a particular transistor I had to plug in on the board. There's a tiny board there which is a voltage regulator, because I wanted to use a particular voltage regulator that only existed in surface mount. So just little things like that. But the rest of it can be breadboarded and.
Yeah.
There it is. It's just a little transistor on the thing. So yeah, that's basically all of it. That you can tidy up that and turn it into a sensible module was quite satisfying.
This is the oscillator.
This is
module.
the VCO, yeah.
The VCO.
Yeah.
So, can you talk a little bit about the features that each of these modules have?
Yeah,
or
sure.
Like maybe a bit more about what I'm interested to know is, first of all, were all these features an idea that you had at the beginning and then you went to breadboarding, or is it a bit different?
Let me try and remember. So the first one I did was the filter. And why did I do the filter? I thought, well, a filter seems like if you're going to make an analog module, right, a filter seems to be your absolutely basic thing that you want to have in an analog synthesizer. So I thought I'd build a filter, and I was looking at various different like building blocks for filters, really. And the thing that struck me when I was looking at these things is that you often get resonant 4-pole filters, because each pole adds, is it 45 degrees? 45 degrees of phase shift at the resonant frequency, which adds up to 180. Then you stick an inverter on the end and feed it back, and then you've got a resonating 4-pole filter. You don't often see resonating 2-pole filters. And just like fiddling around with the sums, it occurred to me that you could add 2 low-pass filter stages, giving you 2 45-degree shifts, and then an all-pass filter giving you a 90-degree shift, adding up to 180, inverter feedback, and you've got a resonating 2-pole. So that struck me as kind of novel. It may not be, I don't know. But most of the filters you see in Eurorack tend to be 4-pole. So I thought, oh, that's an interesting idea. Why don't we try that? So that's kind of where that went. And then once I had these, and I also thought, why did I do that? It also felt to me that a lot of the analog voltage control filters, amplifiers, oscillators and stuff they're basically built from the same parts. Like there's like 2 transconductance amplifier ICs on the market. There's the SSI, the kind of the modern reboot of the classic
The
filter.
3340.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So it's super easy just to kind of get your voltage controlled filter chip and stick it on a board and say, hey, I've built a voltage controlled filter. It's probably not as easy as that, but you know, that just felt a bit easy, and B, like it had obviously been done before, because why wouldn't you? If you want to build a filter and there's a chip that's a filter, why wouldn't you use the chip that's a filter? I mean, especially if you're building a polysynth, right, where you want to minimize the number of huge circuits. So, but again, that's been done, didn't want to do that, so I thought I'd build my own transconductance amplifiers out of transistors, probably, I don't know, they may perform better, they may perform worse than, I mean, in some sense, than the integrated circuits. But the point was that they'd be different, right? You need to be, if it wasn't going to be different, then why was I doing it? So that's why I went down that road. I like how the sound has turned out, I have to say. Other people have said they like it too, but I like that. The point was to try something original. Mm-hmm. So that was the filter. So I had the filter. I did that. So I had the transistorized OTA blocks and stuff, and so then the other two designs, the VCO I did first, and then the phaser, are basically reusing those same filter blocks in different ways. So that the VCO is basically two all passes resonating at their resonant frequency, and then the filter is four all passes. That's what a phaser is, right? It's all pass filters. So having that block created in the first place for the filter made the other two kind of natural things to try next, I guess. And then what were we talking about? Features. So then why did the VCO end up like it was? Having decided to do an oscillator based on the all pass things, that basically gives you a sine wave VCO, right? Which it's got, and it's because of, you can tap the two different filters, you can get quadrature sine wave outputs, which is interesting. But then at the end of the day, all you've got is a sine wave. Whereas most interesting, certainly any subtractive synthesis you want to try and do, you need something a bit more harmonically interesting. Mm-hmm. So that's why the wave shaper stuff got added to that, so that you've, as well as having these sine waves, which, with you certainly using the cross modulation input and using some FM type stuff, you can end up with quite complex timbres just with the sine waves. But if you want to do subtractive stuff, and if you want something that sounds a little bit more like a sawtooth to begin with, then the wave shaping I put on it lets you get that as a kind of basic waveform. And then you've got the fun of modulating the wave shaping, so you've got that kind of timbral and modulation complexity going on as well.
It's interesting that the core is actually a sine wave. Normally it's like at least a triangle. A
ramp or a triangle is normal, with good reason. I mean, they perform extremely well. They're very easy to control. Certainly, once you get onto the designs like the Juno and the digitally controlled triangle ramp, I think they're ramp on the Juno, you've got extremely stable and finely controllable oscillators. But again, these things already exist, so I didn't want to make another one of those. So I thought I'd sort of try something a bit different. So that's why I did that. And the wave shaping's fun. I was particularly pleased with the cross mod input on the VCO. If you can, it's like kind of a hard sync, but with a little bit more controllability and subtlety to it. And you can get all kinds of fun sounds out of that. That's really, when I've been using these things, because I guess I would stress that during the development of all these modules, I've actually used them in my own music just to like prove to myself that they were genuinely useful for something.
That makes sense.
So using the cross mod on the VCO, I had a lot of fun with that. Actually using it in things. So,
it seems quite performative. That's actually the reason that I asked, especially with the VCO, because it's quite packed with features, especially for the form factor.
I would say it's about as packed as you'd expect it to be. But I'm glad you feel it's got a lot of features. It's not. You see these VCOs which are like 20, 30 HP, and they're going to have a lot of features, right? This is only 8 HP, and it's 5 knobs. It seems like a acceptable number of features to me. I guess when I'm comparing against, I mean, just the way they look, right? You've got to compare them against the Dirt for modules and against the Analog Systems modules. And the sort of feature density is, well, I guess maybe very slightly higher.
Yeah.
But not crazily confusing, I don't think.
No, not at all. I think that for the form factor, you packed it just enough. If you would add a little more thing, it would be probably much harder to interact with.
Well, yeah. And I guess also that keeping the things to this kind of size and shape, it keeps it back to what I would consider the original analog idea, really, which is you do have modules, not the original analog, original modular idea, which is things are modular, rather than putting 50,000 things in one space. And I realize as I say that nobody is more guilty than me of putting 50,000 things in one space. But you know, this is me trying to balance the karma, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think again, I think it makes sense. It almost feels like I don't know if I'm just imagining it, but it feels like you like a good challenge.
Oh yeah.
And then every time you're just like, okay, been there, done that, been there, done that. I need something new. I'm just gonna go straight analog, just like build my own oscillator from scratch, see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not working for anybody, right? It's me deciding what happens. And if I'm gonna, the reason I'm doing this is because I enjoy it primarily. And if I'm not going to enjoy it, then I could do without all the extra burden of actually trying to run a company at the same time. If I was going to do something I didn't enjoy, I'd go and let someone else pay me to do that. But no, it's got to be fun. It's got to be interesting. And you know, it may not have gone anywhere, but in the end, I got to the point that I had something I was happy to release, so I've released it. So yeah, I've like I say, got a few more analog things to try. But the other downside of, well, a downside of it being just me is that it is just me. And if I don't find time to do something, it doesn't get done. So there's a lot of things that, you know, are on the shelf for quite a long time while I get around to it.
Is there a chance we're seeing a 20 HP module from you?
There's always a chance. I mean, sometimes I think I'll just sit down and make a synthesizer. You know, just make a synthesizer. But that's a lot of work. And it's certainly, I mean, if I were ever to venture out of Eurorack into the kind of desktop or full-size keyboard space, then that's a whole quantum leap of manufacturing and regulations and stuff. So are
there more regulations in that sense?
Well, if you start including a mains power supply with things, for example, then you've got to worry about people killing themselves. So from that point of view, who knows? I'll never say never. I mean, yeah, maybe one day I'll actually find someone to work with or collaborate with or something, and something like that will happen. But at the moment, everything I want to realise can be realised in Eurorack, so keeping it there for now.
Yeah, I think anything can be realised in Eurorack. That's just like building blocks. But if I'm thinking about the fact that you have now all these modules, you actually have all the technology in front of you already. It's pretty much there. It's about just giving it a different form factor and trying to see what would be an interesting digitally controlled element or analog controlled element in this large thing that's a bit more confined as an instrument.
Yeah, indeed. I do. I mean, that's another reason possibly I had in my mind when I started making a VCO and a filter, is like, if I was to make a synth, I'd need a VCO and a filter. Yeah, maybe. Maybe.
Just nudging you in
it would be nice. I mean, I am a total sucker for a big slab of analog polysynth. It would be great to make at least one in my lifetime. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
I think the challenge in building something larger is also in the design itself, in the interaction, is in the user experience. When you're creating a module, it's a fairly easy problem to solve, because you're just solving this little thing here.
Yeah.
It maybe has 3 features, 5 features, or maybe 100. But bottom line, you're pretty much constrained to, this is a small thing that needs to be in this context.
Yeah.
When you're creating a larger thing, then there is more complexity that comes into, like, where do you actually fit everything? What should you cut off? Like, what is the purpose of this thing when it lives on its own?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I guess the other thing I love to do is have a platform on which I can endlessly iterate. So to lock something down, like a big, probably fairly expensive product that's locked down, and I can't suddenly decide, actually, wouldn't it be great if it did that? That's kind of scary. But, I got over that. Making the jump from doing software originally to doing hardware, that was a huge hurdle to go from fix anything at any time to commit thousands of pounds up front before you even know if you've got a product. Yeah. But I'm safely over that bump now. I think I've got a bit more confidence in bringing hardware to market.
Yeah. You come from software development.
Yeah, I mean, I was a hobbyist electronics guy when I was 12. But all my working life has been software, sort of video effects to begin with, then games for a long time, and then kind of feature film animation kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm happy in a software environment. But
on the programming side of feature film animations.
Yeah, like tool development.
Sorry?
Tool development. So like writing the software that the animators use to animate it.
Yeah. So basically you could build a Blender.
Yeah, I worked for Alias, so I was working on Maya, and others, but mainly Maya. So that was all good fun. I mean, it was a great. It would have been somebody's dream career for sure, but I really wanted to go and make some weird little electronic things, so I did that. But having the things like the distings now and being able to spend my time coding those is such fun, and so much like programming a PlayStation. Even the like assembly language is the same. So having that experience of having to write very high performance code on a very constrained system by any kind of modern standard is good experience to have. But it's something I really enjoy. You don't have to worry about whether whatever big company is going to change the API and screw over all your plugins. It's like, you have built this thing and it will never change unless you change it, and you can just sit there and tweak every last cycle and every last byte out of the RAM, and it's good fun.
Yeah. Now I can actually see quite a lot of, like, it actually makes quite a lot of sense that you've built these high performance tools, and then you went into creating something like this thing.
Yeah, I mean, there was a fair gap between those two things, but yeah, I had that experience to draw on, like years of experience working on large software projects and large teams and highly optimized embedded code. So yeah, it all kind of feeds into, your whole life funnels into wherever you are now. So yeah, it's a good experience to have.
Where do you see yourself developing further in the coming years or coming months?
In a kind of personal development way, or in a kind of process, or?
It seems like it's intertwined, but feel free to just jump into whatever you want.
I'm not sure. I think I'm quite happy with where I've got to. There's so much more I can and want to put into the Disting EX, then I don't think that's just gonna occupy me quite happily for a little while. I want to get into some slightly more advanced DSP kind of code on the Disting EX, which a lot of the, I mean, obviously I ported all the Disting Mark IV stuff to the EX and put some more interesting code in there as well, but all the code in there is running in a kind of Disting Mark IV-ish kind of way, whereas the EX really could do some proper DSP work, which it's not at the moment. For all that it is doing, which I'm pleased with, it's not doing that. You know, there's no Fourier transforms going on at the moment. There's no FFTs and all that kind of. Sorry, that's text messages. What was I saying? Yeah, there's no kind of FFT based DSP stuff going on the EX at the moment, which I'd like to explore, do some things that would enable. Analog wise, like I said, I've got some ideas. I mean, from one point of view, the temptation is to just go through all the analog modules that you would ever have and tick all the boxes so that I can make a full system that says Expert Sleepers on the box. Whether that actually makes any sense, I don't know. Like I said, I'm not going to do anything unless there's at least something novel about it. So I'm unlikely to just say, what have I not got in the lineup at the moment? I don't have an envelope, so I'm not just going to sit down and make an ADSR, probably, unless I can find some fundamentally new twist on an ADSR, right? So who knows? Who knows what will happen there? But I don't know. Just taking it, you know, I tend to kind of blunder through life a little bit and do whatever is shiniest at the time, and usually that works out.
If you're thinking about people who are just starting out and building their own instruments at the moment, where would you wish for them to go? Like if you were thinking about the future of this industry.
Oh, I see. What would I like to see? I don't think the world needs many more MIDI controllers. Honestly, that seems to be something that you get a lot of. And there are a lot of MIDI controllers. And like novel instruments and stuff. And I don't know, I'm a bit skeptical of all these kind of new instruments because they're only instruments for people who dedicate huge amounts of time to learn to play them properly. Whereas a lot of the time I think they're just bought as the kind of the new shiny thing that gets fiddled with and put on Instagram for a few weeks. So I have a healthy skepticism for anybody who's claimed to have invented a new instrument and not just calling it a MIDI controller. Which isn't to say these things don't exist. What would I like to see? I'd like a few more of the kind of thing that I've just done, I guess, just like squelchy analog things. That's what I could see myself using there, but I don't know. There's so much potential, and there's so many things that I'm never going to think of that I just want somebody to think of something new, really. You know, not rehash something, come up with something that's genuinely new, however simple, and then that would be awesome.
That is the goal. But I want to talk a little bit about the fact that what you just described, that people are releasing all sorts of instruments that would just sit for like a couple of weeks and that's it. Like if I'm thinking about like legendary instruments like the Mini Moog, for instance, people had to learn how to work with them. I mean, also with Ableton, you had to work. Like for us, it's kind of like I did this for like 20 years ago, but it's interesting to think about someone who would start with something that is, I don't know, a Chi instrument and be like, I'm gonna master this thing, and then I'm gonna go from there to a Fiat Lombardo, and then from there I'm gonna go to like I'm not really even gonna touch modular synths. I'm gonna explore different complex designs of instruments that are really not conventional.
Yeah, I'm all for that. I mean, that what you're so when you say people like to master the mini moog as an instrument, yeah, that's obviously true. What I guess what I'm trying to what I guess my fundamental skepticism is people who make a MIDI controller and just say it's an instrument, because it's not. It's a controller and it's only an instrument at all if you combine it with something that's going to make some sound. And then are those two things deeply intertwined, or are you really just pressing note on off information and maybe some CCs and it's the unless you can pick it up and make it some music with it, I don't call that an instrument. I call that part of something. So yeah,
Yeah.
if you want to learn very deeply how to use one combination of these things, then yeah, great. I don't, I'm not knocking that, but I think a controller in itself isn't an instrument.
Yeah, well, a controller is needs the work of the musician to make it into an instrument. Otherwise, it is just a
Well, I think
stack of
it
knobs.
needs whatever it's controlling. A controller without something to control is nothing. So unless you
Yeah, but
have both, and then the musician,
if you think about Ableton Push, for instance, would you consider this an instrument?
no, I wouldn't. I'd say that's a controller.
But if it's a controller, then it's not an instrument just because it doesn't have a brain.
No, I say because if you give me a push, I can't make music with it. If you give me a push and live and some instruments and samples, I can make music with it. But then what I can make very much depends on what sounds and samples and whatever I've got loaded up. But if you just give me a push, I can't do anything. Which you give me a mini moog, I can make a tune. Yeah.
Yeah.
You give me a
So if
Rolly
you were,
Seaboard, I can't make a tune. You give me a Harken Continuum, I can make a tune because that's got its own sound engine in it.
yeah, I see your point. I see your point. But at the same time, if I'm looking at something like the Rolly, then I cannot think about this as just like I always have this comparison between a device and an instrument.
Mm-hmm.
A device for me is something that doesn't really inspire you to make, to perform in a different way, to play in a different way, to compose in a different way. Um, but I don't really care if it has a brain or it doesn't. What I care about is how novel is the interaction,
Mm-hmm.
and what kind of what does the interaction, what does the design, what is the design informed by, and how does it actually alter the way that I perform? If I'm thinking about a modular synth, for instance, just the fact that I can patch things together in a way that I could not before, this changes the way that I play music.
Sure.
And if I think about Rolly, I don't really care what instrument, what VST I'm gonna connect it to. I see it as an instrument simply because it allows me to control things in a different way that will just make me play in a different way. So then it becomes like a performative device, which
Yeah.
is an instrument. Yeah,
It's part of an instrument. It's not
yeah.
an instrument, I say. But anyway, no doubt we could argue this till the cows come home. But if we're talking about what I would like people to be developing, yeah, something new. Part of an instrument would be great as long as it can be shown to be useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
No,
I
but
mean, the older I get, the more kind of black and white I tend to get in my statements, and it's not necessarily endearing. So, um, yeah,
but I think it's good. Bottom line, what you're saying is it needs to be novel. It needs to be interesting.
yeah,
People should like we want to see things that will allow people to perform. Like taking it the completely different direction. If if everybody would just work with analog circuits and make the most beautiful oscillators and filters, we are not going to move that far. Yes, it has the brain inside, but in terms of an instrument, I would be like, yeah, okay, we have so many of these that we want to see things that will allow a different kind of performance.
I wouldn't necessarily put all my eggs in the performance basket. I think there's a lot of scope for things that make kind of studio-based sound nicer and more interesting. I mean, let's face it, that's where most people are making their music. Mm-hmm. It's great if you can perform. It's great if you can perform live. It's great if you can perform even if it's kind of live in the context of a track you're making in your bedroom. But there's a lot of stuff that I don't feel falls into the performance category that still makes really nice, interesting sound.
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, when I'm saying performance, I actually don't really mean performance in like a live setting. More like the way that you interact with it is really tactile.
Okay.
Like if I'm looking at this thing, for instance, it's more of a very it comes with a very specific thought. It's like, I need this now, and then I'll program this to make it what I want. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with something like Pamela's new workout. Mm-hmm. I don't really, I don't swipe it, you know. Like
I think ALM would argue with that. They do consider the Pamela's as a performance thing, because it's got quite an intuitive, even though it's got like menus and stuff, you can quite intuitively get in there and change your patterns and subdivisions and clocks and stuff. And I know Matthew's, you know, said on more than one occasion that it is a performative tool, because it's all about driving the fundamental rhythms of your modular, and you can very easily change it on the fly in a performance kind of style. So not necessarily, I'm nitpicking with that particular example, but yeah, there are things in modular that serve a function, and
it's I agree. I think it's a matter of semantics, because when I'm talking about performance, I'm more thinking about like a filter or anything that I would just like tweak and change. And when I'm looking at Pamela's new workout, I look at it as more like a compositional tool. Okay. I can modify it with, like, I would actually connect CV to it and I would control it, but it's more of, I don't know how to explain it. It's something that I designed the instrument with it, right? But I don't really touch it after I designed it. And if you look at people on YouTube, for instance, playing with Pamela's new workout, you actually see that it sits there, or even two of them, and they will all say, without this, I cannot, like, nothing will work, because it makes everything so easy. You can, like, not even easy, but just like, it makes so much sense. Otherwise, how would you do things? How would you trigger things? And how would you make progressions or changes? But when I'm thinking about a performance, I'm really thinking about the like the things that I would make sure are not cluttered with cables around them, so I'll be able to get really quickly to them, make changes, and discover surprises.
Yeah, I understand. Sorry, I'm just trying to backtrack to see if there was a question that I was supposed to answer.
There's no question.
No, I understand. I understand where you're coming from with that. You definitely, you want to reach out and touch that filter. Yeah. What's trying to think what I do when I'm playing with a modular most of all. What do I do?
Yeah, what do you do?
Certainly mess around with filters. It tends to be let's think. Once I've got, I mean, my use of modulars in music, certainly in a live context, is very old school, in that what I've probably set up in a rack is a couple of 2 or 3 monosynths and a couple of sequences. You know, I mean, I'm not doing big complex generative West Coast kind of stuff. I'm basically having it burbling along, playing a riff or a bass line. Oh, and there's somebody started up with a chainsaw. So that's great.
It's very faint.
Oh, okay, that's good. Sorry, yeah, so what am I doing? So when I'm performing with it, I'm probably I'm mucking about with filters, I'm probably mucking about with envelope times, I'm probably certainly messing about with sequences, things like the Chaos Moskva, that kind of thing, you know, just make it longer, shorter. I'd use my own FH2 with a MIDI keyboard into the FH2 running the arpeggiator. There's a kind of mode that's not really an arpeggiator, it's more of a kind of on-the-fly sequencer kind of feel, so I use that quite a lot. What else am I doing? That's probably a lot of it, actually. Yeah, definitely filters, envelope times, sequences. Bit of repatching if I really feel the need to change the sound drastically, but that kind of does me. I guess I should say when I'm performing, the modular is only kind of a third of, or even less of what's going on. So I don't feel like I have to make this completely standalone, coherent thing and just in the modular, because there's other stuff happening. So that kind of extent does for me.
So you're playing with a computer as well, or with?
So if it's just me, it'll be me with a laptop, a modular, and some kind of woodwind, probably a bass clarinet or something. If I'm in my band, dark room, then it's all of that, plus a guitarist who is doing his own thing, but also coming into the laptop so I can make loops of what he's playing. And that, you know, by the time I've got 4 or 5 guitar loops going, that's a large part of the sound that's happening at any one time. And the synth stuff kind of comes and goes. Yeah.
What do you think about transitions in the modular space? Like it seems with like live music, the easiest thing to do is to make a transition, go from this chord progression to this chord progression, or just smash the cymbal and move on.
Yeah.
How do you make modular more like
well, contrary to what you've just said, I mean, I totally get where you're coming from. If you're in a, I guess, normal band, then yeah. But given what I've just described about how we normally work, where you've typically got a big soundscape going on that's maybe taken 5 minutes to build up, transitions has always been a nightmare for us, even before modulars are involved in the equation, because you know we're not playing short songs, we're improvising for 20-30 minutes at a time and build something up over a long period, and it's always been quite hard to make transitions. But yeah, I totally get where you're coming from in the modular. I guess my solution in that normal context has been to just stop using the modular for a little while and then bring it back again with something else, because there's so much else going on. If the modular stops for a bit while I repatch, that's fine. So I don't know how people actually manage transitions on a module. I can only imagine they just have multiple sub patches going on that they turn on and off, or some software based thing doing some of it that can be recalled by hitting patch recall. I don't know. I don't have a lot of input to offer on that one because I don't personally do it.
Yeah, it's just a side note. It's an interesting thing to think about, because I think it's one of these things that could be novel to explore if we're thinking about the future.
Yeah.
It will also change, just like you said, these transitions are not necessarily that needed because of the style of music. So that's just also something to keep in mind.
I think there seems to be this expectation that a modular synth act will start playing, play for 20, 30, 40 minutes and then stop. Like, no band does that. Why can you not stop in between songs? Why can you not play a 4-minute song, stop, repatch, and start play another song? Why do you have to have this endless, seamless transition? It's kind of confounding the modular synth player with the DJ, which they're not.
Yeah.
So why do we need seamless transitions? I would say.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I think that when you're looking at live bands like rock bands, then the transition happens in the song itself. But yeah, it's a very different kind of track, of performance, of anything.
Mm.
Yeah. But I think this was really interesting.
Yeah.
I learned quite a bit in this conversation.
Oh, good.
I'm known for trying to make standalone instruments. Although make standalone instruments, and I have a Eurorack behind me, and that's pretty much like.
Well, it's standing alone on the shelf back there. Yeah.
No, but it is interesting because it adds different perspectives to how we design instruments in general. This thing was actually one of the first modules that I bought.
Okay.
Without knowing anything about Eurorack. It just made a lot of sense because I felt like, yeah, I just have 84 HP and I need to be able to just, when I look for something, just to have it. And this was like the perfect solution for that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see what happens when we're growing and people have these massive devices, or like there's a rise in building standalone instruments as well, and all this stuff is really intriguing. Yeah,
definitely. I'm just going to agree with you there. I can't think of anything pithy to add.
No, yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. It was a very interesting conversation.
We kind of, I couldn't honestly tell you where the recorded bits. Is the whole thing considered the podcast interview? I thought we were warming up and then we slipped into it. But
yeah, I am probably just going to cut it from the point you talked about your vision, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, that seems like a fine place to. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, nice. Nice talking to you.
Yeah, nice talking to you as well.
Thank you.